Should we be suspicious? The boys weren't. I trust them. Well, I trust Robin and Superboy. I'm satisfied. They're good kids. There's certainly no right from wrong. Whatever happened, I'm sure they did the right thing. And if for some reason they couldn't tell us the entire truth, well, we all have our little secrets, don't we? Before we get too far into things, I should take a moment to explain what a fifth week event is, since they and other crossovers wound up shaping a fair bit of the team's history. See, comic books come out on Wednesdays, and most individual titles run so that they release one issue per month. Thus, the easiest way to help your regular readers remember to pick up their books is to schedule things so that the same title comes out on the same Wednesday of every month. So, Superman might come out on the 1st, Batman on the 2nd, Action Comics on the 3rd, and Detective Comics on the 4th, just as an example. But, if you know anything about math and calendars, you've probably already noticed that this would account for only 48 out of 52 weeks every year, because there's always 4 months out of the year that has 5 Wednesdays. Enter the fifth week event, or skip week events, limited run comics that would come out to fill the scheduling gaps. The earliest of these tended to be loosely affiliated groups of standalone issues sharing a single theme, such as 1998's Girl Frenzy, a series of 7 standalone one-shots focusing on DC's female heroes. Most were associated with ongoing titles and spotlighted established characters, like JLA Tomorrow Woman and Superman Lois Lane. But the last of the run introduced a brand new character, and with her a brand new title, Young Justice: The Secret Number 1. The issue begins with 3 young heroes, Robin, aka Tim Drake, Superboy, and Impulse, or Bart Allen, in separate interrogations, being debriefed on the events of a recent mission by shadowy, unseen figures. This is, so far as I know, the first time we'd ever seen all 3 of these characters working together as the focus of a book. Technically, they had all appeared together at the very beginning of the year in the 99th and 100th issues of the Legion of Superheroes. But that wasn't so much of a team-up of the trio as it was the 3 individually helping the Legion on various fronts. The Justice League showed up too. Otherwise, Superboy and Robin had previously met in the 2-issue miniseries World's Finest 3 in 1996, while Robin and Impulse teamed up that same year for an issue of Plus Comics, a series of one-shots based around throwing 2 heroes together for a standalone adventure. Superboy and Impulse met in 1997 in an issue of Superboy and the Ravers, which is very 90s. Yeesh. This is also the first time we see the art and coloring combo of Todd Nowak and Larry Stucker, which would come to be a defining part of the ongoing series. For the most part, the Young Justice ongoing kept the same creative team for its entire 5-year run, which really helped the book develop its own personality, and a big part of that is the art. In retrospect, some of it is very 90s, but it's offset by the exaggerated size of things like feet, hands, and eyes. Yet, it also doesn't skew entirely cartoony, like, say, the art style used in Impulse's solo title. It strikes a good balance between the two, as well as getting the teen heroes in a sweet spot where they look like young kids, but not small children. It's a perfect fit for what the series would grow to be, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. In their interrogations, the boys recount how they came together by chance and were semi-recruited by the DEO, that would be the Department of Extranormal Operations, an organization within the DCU intended to deal with larger-than-human threats. They're asked to recover an escaped gaseous monster capable of altering its toxicity at will. Robin cooks up a strategy using the other's powers to scare the creature out and suck it into a bottle, only for the captured entity to look back at them with the face of a teenage girl. She pleads for their help, explaining her backstory, that she's been trapped in a DEO orphanage with dozens of other superpowered children, and that now that she's been proven dangerous, the DEO intends to kill her once she's reclaimed. The boys opt to help her, since the DEO had given them some not-so-subtle reasons to doubt the official story. They use some smoke bombs and a chemical explosion to fake the unnamed girl's death, setting her free to explore the world as she pleases. Since she'll only stay free so long as she stays dead, the boys swear to each other to keep her a secret, even lying flat out to their JLA mentors, who were the ones running the interrogation all along. I'm pretty sure that without this issue, the entire Girl Frenzy event would have been completely forgotten, like most comic stunt events are. But introducing Secret offered this snippet a bit of staying power. While most other team members, including the boys themselves, technically belong to their own corners of the DCU and were therefore subject to the whims of other creators, Secret belonged to the team, leaving her free to be one of the book's central emotional anchors for the length of its run. The story began with her, and it would eventually end with her too. As for the boys, this standalone issue really displays why the three would go on to be such an iconic trio. Even though it's out of focus, and their personalities aren't nearly as distinct as they would be in the main series, they've got a good team dynamic going, with enough tension to keep things interesting. Overall, The Secret #1 proved a good taste of things to come, and is probably the best introduction to what Young Justice the series would eventually be. It's got the art, it's got the tone, it's got the repertoire, and it doesn't skew too heavily to the extremes of either drama or comedy. Which makes it all the stranger that the collected trade instead filed it after the event that came out 2 months later, the 2-issue miniseries JLA World Without Grownups. World Without Grownups kicks off with a 13-year-old brat named Matt Stewart getting a birthday present from his archaeologist father, an ancient Atlantean artifact. Because, that sounds like a great present for a preteen. Said artifact turns out to contain an ancient all-powerful genie thing which the kid releases and is partially possessed by. And since the last thing in his head at the time was a burning resentment against his parents, he naturally uses his newfound godly world-shaping powers to wish, for lack of a better term, for the titular World Without Grownups. Come the next morning, every child in the world has disappeared, leaving the adults, including the Justice League, freaking the hell out. While they panic, the residents of Kid World find themselves without adults, and immediately begin running amok. Luckily for everyone involved, Kid World means kid heroes, and we get this nice montage of teen do-gooders saving the day, including cameos from future team members. Robin, Superboy, and Impulse find each other in the chaos and decide to team up to essentially be the Justice League, since their mentors are all missing. They seek out Billy Bastion, the teenage true identity of adult hero Captain Marvel, who isn't much help, as he's reluctant to assume his alter ego for fear that it might be suicide. But, while at his TV station, a weather report points the trio to an unusual storm forming over Happy Harbor, Rhode Island, a small town best known as the location of Mount Justice, aka the Secret Sanctuary, the original JLA headquarters. Matt, now going by Bedlam, has set up camp inside Mount Justice itself, though it's never really explained why. I mean, narratively it's because that's where YJ would set up their first headquarters, but Matt lived in Boston, and I assume the Secret Sanctuary wasn't too widely known because then it wouldn't be, a secret. But whatever. He's there, and he's turned the surrounding landscape into a nightmarish hellscape based on video games and cartoon characters. One that can seemingly be influenced by the boys' thoughts as well, but to a much lesser extent. Meanwhile, Billy Bastion steals his nerves to try saying his magic word, but instead of changing into Captain Marvel, it takes him into a space between worlds. He manages to steer himself to the JLA Watchtower in Adult World and point the Justice League to Happy Harbor. To be honest, aside from providing some exposition about how the two worlds work, like the fact that the adults have been taken away, not the kids, the JLA is kind of superfluous to the story. As we see heading back to Kid World, the real point of this adventure is to showcase the three heroes who will become the YJ founders. First, there's a display of teamwork where they use a combination of strategy, speed, and strength to get themselves out of a tight spot. Then, upon the realization that they've been tied into Bedlam's powers basically just by being there, the three are separated to go solo up against their personal worst possible villain as kids. Get used to that, by the way. Running into junior versions of things is going to be kind of a theme. For Superboy, that villain is Metallo, who was ironically one of the people he fought with Robin during their first meeting. Only instead of having a kryptonite heart, little Metallo here is made entirely of kryptonite, which says something about Superboy that we'll get into in a second. Impulse's big enemy is Gorilla Grodd, but not in a super intelligent gorilla way, just in a giant monkey chasing him up a building like King Kong kind of way. And Robin gets a tiny Joker doing a Hannibal Lecter impression. They break free by utilizing a bit of mind over matter control over Bedlam's magic to tag out and face each other's villains. On paper, these encounters are so brief and quick that you probably skip right past them without thinking too much, but I'm kind of here to overanalyze stuff, so let's take a second. Like I said, Metallo can be seen to represent Superboy's brash views of danger, superheroics, and fighting in general. The greatest threat is the one that can hit him the hardest. But that same threat gets overcome by squishy normal human Robin with a well-placed martial arts blow and a bit of mental control over his surroundings. Bart's encounter with Grodd is childish and overblown, embracing one of the Flash's goofiest villains, but not making use of the hyper-intelligence that's normally associated with him. Because, well, Bart can't imagine something that intelligent. I don't know for sure if this is the case, but I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Bart hadn't actually met Grodd up to this point. He just knows that there's a Flash villain who's a scary monkey and let his imagination fill in the rest. And since little Grodd is not very sophisticated, Superboy beats him with a flick of his finger. Compare that to the little Joker encounter, which isn't a fight at all. It's just the Joker pelting Robin with his own insecurities. That's not exactly creative, but it does amuse me, because it means that Tim is aware that his self-depreciation is his biggest weakness, and yet it still gets to him. He tends to internalize and overthink things, so something that gets into his head can really bother him, even if he knows it's what it's trying to do. Which is why it's hilarious when Bart wins the day by annoying little Joker into submission by asking why over and over again like a 5-year-old. Taken together, these quick flashes neatly communicates the boys' individual weaknesses and how their teamwork can overcome them. Which is kind of the point of this entire micro-series, to establish for the audience why you should want to follow their continuing adventures as a team. From there, the boys descend into Mount Justice, as do the League on the other world. On the adult side, they find Captain Marvel, separate from Billy and being used as a conduit to focus Bedlam's power and keep the adult world in existence. There's a moment of insecurity when they all wonder what will happen to everyone living in adult world the minute Cap wakes up and stops dreaming their dream, but again, we're not really here for that side of the adventure. In Kid World, Proto-YJ confronts Bedlam, where the little monster decides to let them destroy each other by tapping into their imaginations to produce what each of them would use to beat one of their friends. Like with the little villains, each of these encounters says something about the boys in relationship to each other. Robin is the most cerebral of the group, so you'd expect him to come up with some complicated plot to take down Superboy, but it's just a robot made of kryptonite. Which is basically what Lil Metallo was. So you could also say that this is a refined version of a proven concept, one that he's seen the kid be nearly beaten by twice before. And it looks like an anime mech because Tim is not so secretly a giant nerd. Superboy, on the other hand, is blunt and brash. It's easy to think of him as a straightforward, raw power, punch it until it stops moving kind of problem solver because, well, he is. But his method of beating Impulse isn't violent at all. He restrains him, which causes Bart a lot of pain because he's basically movement personified. This shows that Khan's a lot more insightful than he lets on, and hints that he's actually got a lot of potential under all that bluster. And then there's Bart, who, when prompted to defeat Robin, conjures ninjas. Which seems deceptively simple and lame until Robin realizes that Impulse has also clouded his mind, taking away his biggest advantage in a fight. Again, Impulse is cleverer than he seems, but his strategy also clues Robin in to what has to be done to dispel the threat, clearing their minds. And it works. Well, at least until Impulse's ADHD kicks in. Luckily, Bart does figure out a trick, thinking of his mind like resetting a game console, and manages to use that to disrupt Bedlam's thoughts enough that Matt loses focus, which in turn loosens the genie's hold on his mind. Robin is then able to psychoanalyze Matt into submission while Superboy keeps the genie at bay. At the same time, the JLA uses some kind of prayer circle with Captain Marvel to remerge the two worlds. Like I said, their part of the story is kinda weak. Matt goes catatonic, and there's a celebration all around, ending off with Batman, the most controlling and protective of the mentors, giving Robin permission to hang out with his friends, and the boys declaring that they make a great team. World Without Grownups has a killer premise, which is probably why it got used for episodes of both the Young Justice cartoon and Justice League Unlimited. It's Kid Lit 101. If you want your younger heroes in the spotlight, take the adults out of the picture. I've seen people call this a plot tailored to the powers of Captain Marvel, but like I said in the review, his half of the story is more about exposition and world building, explaining the story so that the three Proto-YJ members can focus on the resolution. If anything, it's actually a spotlight moment for Bart, who is ultimately key to Bedlam's defeat, who catches the most doubt from the adults, and who has arguably the most to prove in regard to a very important theme. My favorite moment in the whole thing comes when the boys are wandering through the maze that Bedlam has created out of Mount Justice. They stumble on this portrait of the original Justice League. Robin and Superboy quickly move on, but Impulse lingers behind, staring at the picture of his namesake and grandfather, the Silver Age Flash Barry Allen. This uncharacteristic moment of calm and stillness shows how Bart, despite his reckless and carefree attitude, feels the weight of his heroic legacy just as strongly as his friends. One of the most unique aspects of Young Justice was how nearly all of its original members were, in one form or another, legacy heroes. That is to say, either descended from or voluntarily taking up the identity of a previously established figure. This is a team made up of the second Superboy, the third Robin, a third-generation speedster, and eventually both the second Wonder Girl and the second Miss Arrowette. With all that, plus the team's heavily implied initial conception as a junior Justice League, you can imagine how important the theme of legacy will be to the ongoing story. Hell, I'd argue that it's a primary theme, and one that sets Young Justice apart from other superhero teams, especially the Teen Titans. But let's table that discussion for a moment. There's a much better place for it later on. For now, suffice it to say that neither The Secret nor World Without Grownups explores that theme in any detail, but they do lay a solid groundwork for the series to come and do a lot to sell the readers on the core trio that make up the foundation of the team. The team that we'll be getting to know in greater detail next time.